Good day. This is Brother Medina for Tuesday, Seventh-day Adventist. And please let us start with a word of prayer. Gracious, loving Father, be with us right now as we enter into your word. Bless everyone listening and help them to learn the truth, that they may prepare for your coming, and that your love may be manifested in them for salvation. These mercies we ask of you through the truths of Jesus Christ, the plan of salvation. Amen. Well, today we want to talk about the real gospel. The real gospel. We want to deal with what the real gospel is all about. You see, so much evil have been going wrong in this world that people need to understand the real gospel that delivers them from evil or delivers them from sin. And this is what we want to talk about today. The problem that human beings have, the problem that everyone have that are not converted, is a problem of the absence of Christ and the absence of God in them. Yes, my dear people. It is called vacuousness, emptiness of God, emptiness of the character of Christ. This is the problem of sin that exists in the world today. The human mind is empty of Christ, empty of God. If we read in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 12, here is what we are told. I quote, that at that time you were without Christ. Did you hear that? Without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. End of quote. Did you see that? So the problem of man is that he is without Christ and without God in the world. Yes, my dear people, this is the problem of sin that people have. And this causes people to do all sorts of wrongs, all kind of horrible wrongs. Take, for instance, a judge judges that a Muslim immigrant that came to one of those European countries, he went on the beach, he saw women bathing in their bathing suits and bikinis, whatever. He raped a woman. And what did the judge say? The judge said that because the culture that he is in is alien to him, and because of his religion, he cannot be charged or convicted as guilty. So he is not guilty because of his Islamic religion, and he is not guilty because the culture is strange to him. Then what is he doing in that country? What is he doing there? This is the kind of judgment they keep meting out over and over, and that judgment is sinful. It is the same kind of judgment we had in the United States of America also, where a woman, notice this, was charged for Islamophobia, whatever that means. And do you know what the judge told her? She's a Christian and she must attend a mosque for teachings or instructions into Islam that she would not have Islamophobia. That's what the judge in the United States told the woman. Of course, they have not invented a term Christian phobia, and they wouldn't tell a Muslim or a person of another religion to go to a Christian church for instructions from the Bible that they wouldn't have Christian phobia. No. Because you see, the Illuminati left is allied with Islam to destroy the existence of Christianity from countries. And all this for the New World Order. All that is sin. Those who do those things are vacuous of the character of Christ. They are vacuous of the nature of God. And that's the reason why we have such terrible sins existing in the world today. Yes, my dear people, this is the real facts about the matter. Now, the facts are, the real gospel brings salvation. Plenty of people claim that, oh, you don't need Christianity, you don't need preaching no gospel, but the facts are the real gospel brings salvation. If you look at Romans chapter 1 and verse 16, here is what we are told in the Word of God. I quote, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ." Notice this. "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." Did you see that? We are told the gospel is the power of God unto salvation. What saves us from sin is the gospel. Therefore, if you do not know the gospel, you cannot be saved. That's the reason why salvation always involves preaching to people and speaking to people's minds that those people may be free from sin. Yes, my dear people. So you must preach the gospel to them, because it is only the gospel that actually is the power of God unto salvation. But then you have the Democrats in the United States doing something very, very extreme. The whole party is a hodgepodge of extremists on the left, those who are seeking to change America to bring it as a part of the New World Order. They tabled a bill to Congress, and this bill is to ban pastors from ministering to homosexuals, as they say it. In other words, they want to get a law to ban pastors from ministering to sodomites. They are actually telling you now by law who you could preach to and who you're not supposed to preach to. They want the people to remain in their sins because they're being converted by the gospel. And if they're being converted by the gospel, then it would mean that sodomy is not a genetic thing or in their genes, and that they have no control over it and that they cannot change. Because look, they're being converted. So what do they want to do? They want to stop the conversion, to keep the delusion, to keep the lie existing. Why? To use this to demoralize a country. Because when you demoralize a country by conspiracy, you are actually preparing the country for the New World Order. And that's what they're doing. And so they table a bill to ban pastors from ministering to homosexuals. Who else will they try to ban pastors from talking to? And once this precedent is set, where is the separation of church and state they like to bawl out about? And a further thing about all of this, the state or the government has no authority over the mind of an individual controlled by God. Because that mind has freedoms. And those freedoms are to be exercised as God convict the person. And if God tell you, preach to this man to bring him to the truth, how could a human law tell you you can't minister to him? And that's what they're seeking to do now. And all this clearly shows us the gospel of Christ. This great gospel of Christ is what gives salvation, and they're trying to shut the salvation away from the people. These are the horrible things that are going on. They don't want people to be changed from their sins, but it is the gospel that brings salvation. Yes, my dear people. And what is salvation? Salvation is salvation from sin according to the Bible. When we talk about salvation, we are talking about salvation first and foremost from sin. This is what we are talking about. In Matthew chapter 1 and verse 21, here is what we are told. I quote, "And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins." End of quote. Did you see that? Salvation, therefore, is salvation from sin. And salvation from sin works generally to everyone, everybody who needs it. Once you are in sin, you need salvation. And the facts are, salvation is salvation from sin. But what is sin? What is the biblical definition of sin? In 1 John chapter 3 and verse 4, here is what we are told. I quote, "Whosoever committed sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law." If you look at it according to the original translation, in the Greek, it tells us, "Whosoever committed sin transgresseth certainly the law, for sin is the transgression of the law." But the Greek says, "and sin is transgression of the law." So in other words, what does it mean? It means sin is breaking God's law. It is transgressing God's 10 commandments. And when an evangelical come and tell you, but sin is also unbelief, sin is also unrighteousness, they are trying to give you the impression that there are other things called sin that is not under the law, that the law doesn't address. So they're giving you the impression that the 10 commandments is incomplete, so that it has other things called sin that is not addressed by the 10 commandments. That's a deception. That's not true. But that's what they're doing when they talk to you and tell you there are other things called sin. It's not just only transgression of the law. That's erroneous. That's false. Yes, my dear people. But it is also sinful for a person to actually go and buy up the fresh water of a country and then go before the public and declare that since water is not a right, you can take it. Since water is not a right, so water is not a right for the people, so you can buy up the fresh water and control it. And this is what these mega banks and mega corporations have been doing all over the world, so that they now control fresh water. So that according to their whims and their fancies, we're going to have to pay for fresh water. And not just only that, they're going to make so much profits on people, and people are going to die of thirst because they cannot afford this fresh water. This is what is going to happen. The world is headed for a terrible future. Don't you not see that? Don't you not understand? Trouble is coming, and you're being warned before to give your mind to Jesus Christ. Let the truths of his character control your mind. Think about those truths. Learn those truths from the Bible. There is pleasure in it. There is satisfaction in it. And there is successful direction for your existence. Real meaning and real purpose in your existence. This is the only way. Yes, my dear people. And so sin is transgression of God's law. This is what we are told. But what causes this gospel of Christ to be able to save us? That's the question. Why is it that the gospel of Christ is able to save us? We are told that the gospel of Christ is able to save us because the righteousness of God is unveiled in it. Yes, my dear people, get this. Something called the righteousness of God, which is critical for everybody's existence, that exists in the gospel. The gospel unfolds that. So the gospel works to save us because of this thing called the righteousness of God. In Romans chapter 1 again, and verse 16 again, and verse 17 with it, here is what we are told. I quote, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." Why is it the power of God unto salvation? Verse 17 tells us, "For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." End of quote. Did you see that? We are actually being told that the gospel of Christ works because the righteousness of God is in it. Yes, my dear people. This critical element, this important thing called the righteousness of God, is unveiled or revealed or unfolded in the gospel. And that is what makes it work to save us. That's what makes it capable of saving us. And this is the reason why you need the gospel of Christ. Yes, my dear people. This is why we are telling you, you need the gospel of Christ. If we read Romans chapter 3 again, and we look at verse 22, we would see that this righteousness of God must be into us. It must be in us, or into us, as the Greek text tells us. The Greek word is ies, and it doesn't mean unto as translated. It means into. So let's read Romans 3:22. I quote, "Even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ, into all, and upon all them that believe, for there is no difference." End of quote. Did you see that? Once this righteousness of God is into you, it is upon you, meaning you wear it as a spiritual garment. Yes, my dear people. So when people face you, they face the righteousness of God covering you, because the righteousness of God is into you or in you. This righteousness of God is very important. It must be in us. It must dwell in us. And so the gospel must give us the righteousness of God, that the righteousness of God must be able to dwell in us. But you ask yourself the question, what is this righteousness of God? There is a very strange scripture in Romans chapter 3 that explains what is this righteousness of God in a particular way. If we look at Romans chapter 3, we will read verse 20 and 21, but verse 21 is the real verse we want to read, but we're going to read verse 20 for the background for you to understand what is being said in verse 21. I quote, verse 20, "Therefore by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin." What is this verse telling us? It tells us that you do not do the law to justify yourself or to make yourself righteous. The law brings to us a knowledge of sin. So you don't do the law to make yourself righteous, but it doesn't say you're not supposed to do the law at all. You see, evangelicals make up false doctrines with regard to this verse. They give you the impression that the verse is telling you you're not supposed to keep the commandments of God, when it is telling you an unjustified man, a man who is in sin, cannot just go and do the law and bring righteousness to himself, justifying himself. Man is incapable of doing that, because justification is not a work of man, it is a work of God. You see? And in theology there's a term used to identify that God only can do something. You call it monergism, meaning God alone. And justification is monergistic. It could only be done by God alone. So you cannot take your own works and by your works just bring righteousness to yourself. And this scripture is telling us that. It is telling us the mistake that the Jews made. They believe that they can do the works of the law to justify themselves. And he's telling us, by the deeds of the law shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Yes, my dear people, that's what we are being told here. So what was the problem? The point we are looking at in this verse is the phrase, deeds of the law. That is, works of the law. The works of the law that you do. Now we can read verse 21 to get a better understanding. I quote, "But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets." End of quote. Did you see that? A strange scripture, but it tells us, but now the righteousness of God without the law. The phrase without the law means without the deeds of the law. Yes, my dear people, which you just read in verse 20. So there is a righteousness of God that is apart from, according to the Greek text, the deeds of the law. It is different to the deeds of the law. It is without the deeds of the law. So I quote the verse again. But now the righteousness of God without the deeds of the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. End of quote. So the phrase law and the prophets is used in the Bible to identify the writings of Moses, which was called the law, and the prophets is used to identify the writings of the other prophets apart from Moses. So you have the writings of Moses, and then you have the writings of the prophets. It is called the law and the prophets. Moses' writings is called the law because it emphasizes and is built upon the law, the 10 Commandments, evidently. So in other words, we are being told if you look in the law and the prophets, or the writings of Moses and the writings of the prophets, you will see the righteousness of God that is different to the works of the law, different to the deeds of the law, because we are being told it is witnessed by the law and the prophets. So in the writings of the law, the writings of Moses, and in the writings of the prophets, you will find a testimony of the righteousness of God that is different to the deeds of the law. So when you read the writings of Moses, you read the writings of the other prophets, you find something called the righteousness of God, and that righteousness of God is not the same as the deeds of the law. That's what we've been told. It is a righteousness of God that cannot be done by works, because it is different to the deeds of the law. You cannot do this righteousness of God because it is different to the deeds of the law. Yes, my dear people, or as the Greek text says, it is apart from the deeds of the law. So if you are trying to do this righteousness of God, you cannot, because it is apart from or different to the deeds of the law. Now, what is this righteousness of God? If we turn to Jeremiah chapter 23, and we look at verse 5 and verse 6, here is what we are told. I quote, "Behold, the days come, saith Yahweh, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch." So we are reading the prophets now, what is said in the writings of the prophets. It continues. We are reading in Jeremiah. "And a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth." Obviously, this is a prophecy of Jesus Christ, who was to come the first time, before it happened. It continues. "In his days Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is his name whereby he shall be called, Yahweh our righteousness." End of quote. Did you hear that? Yahweh our righteousness. Not Yahweh has righteousness, not Yahweh gives us righteousness, but Yahweh our righteousness. We are being told our righteousness is Yahweh himself. God himself is our righteousness. This is what we are being told. And as Yahweh is our righteousness, you cannot do Yahweh. You cannot do God. God is not the deeds of the law. Yahweh is not the deeds of the law. So here is a righteousness of God that is apart from or different to the deeds of the law. Yes, my dear people. Here is a righteousness of God that is without the deeds of the law, because it is different to the deeds of the law. You can do the deeds of the law, but you cannot do Yahweh. You cannot do God. And we are told Yahweh our righteousness. So the righteousness of God is God himself. Yes, my dear people. This needs to be properly understood. One of the critical things about the Protestant Reformation is when the Protestant Reformation found out that righteousness is not only good deeds inspired by God, but that righteousness is something else apart from the deeds of the law. That righteousness is not just only right doing, but many religions only see righteousness as right doing. They don't understand that righteousness is also God himself. That's why In the Protestant Reformation, Luther clearly explained that there were two righteousnesses. Two righteousnesses. The deeds of the law, or the right doing of the law, but also God himself, Christ himself. That's what he tells us. And that's important for us to learn, that there's a righteousness of God that is without the deeds of the law, or apart from the deeds of the law. But most of them just think that righteousness is just right doing only. And that's a mistake. Because when you ask them, how is the righteousness of God being put into you? They say right doing is being put into you. Then you ask them how? They say God impute right doing into you because he impute righteousness to you. Then you ask them what righteousness? They say, well, what Christ did. So they give you the impression that God take the deeds that Christ did, the deeds of the law that Christ did, and he doesn't put it in you, he put it in some books in heaven, in some credit, so that you did what Christ did. But you didn't heal any blind man. You didn't raise Lazarus. But yet they give you the impression that the deeds that Christ did is put on some books on your name. That's false doctrine. That's false teaching. There is not a scripture that shows that. And they cannot show it to you from the scriptures. Did you feed 5,000 people? Did you do that? No, you didn't do that. But yet they're giving you the impression the deeds that Christ did is put on some books, so that God is going to fool himself and tell you, well, you did it. The average person can see you didn't do those things. Those things were done 2,000 years ago by Jesus himself on the earth. But they are trying to fool you to give you the impression that those right doing of the law of Jesus is on some books. And those books is where your name is. So that God will say, oh, John Brown did what Jesus did. He did Jesus' right doing. That's false doctrine. That's false Christian doctrine. You cannot be saved by those teachings because that's not the gospel. It appears as if it is right. It sounds good. But it makes you become irresponsible because you are dependent upon what Christ did as if it is yours, when you are supposed to be doing the law of God by faith. Yes, my dear people. So you're removed from your responsibility of doing right, of right doing, by thinking somebody's right doing is there in a book to you. Oh, but they will tell you, no, 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 you're supposed to still do the law. Why are you supposed to still do it if somebody else doing it on your name and for you? Why are you supposed to still do it? What, you don't know how the human mind works? The human mind can't contemplate that kind of madness. You expect them to think that they're supposed to still do the law, and while they're still doing the law, it is because the doing of Jesus is on the books against their name, so that all their failings, Jesus makes up for it. That is false teaching. It gives the impression that you cannot do the law at all, not even by God causing you to do it. And if God cannot cause you to do it, then he has made unreasonable demands for us to keep his law. Now we're going to have to continue this discussion. But we want you to know the real gospel saves you from sin. And you need the righteousness of God, God himself. Because it is God himself that is your Savior. It is only God that can save. We want you to know these things. So when people come with these false teachings to you, you must get your teachings from the Bible and the Bible only. And this is the reason why we are presenting this to you. So all the leftists and the rightists, the far left, could you imagine what the president of Austria told the public? They call him a far left president. He only won the elections by cheating from George Soros and his election machines. Because the other man on the right, the nationalist, was supposed to have won. But do you know what he told the whole public in Austria? The whole country is going to have to show that they're against Islamophobia by all the women wearing headscarf. What nonsense is this? He wants all the women in Austria to wear the covering of the head that Muslims ask women to wear to show that they're against Islamophobia. So they're going to make it a law. There again is the left allying itself with Islamicists to deteriorate a country. Or he wouldn't say he wants everybody to wear a cross on their chest to show that they don't have Christian phobia. They haven't even invented the word yet. But we see the great destruction going on. And all these destructions can only be removed by the truths of Jesus Christ, the plan of salvation. And this is the reason why you need to know the real gospel, because only the real gospel can deliver you from those delusions. Well, any one of you who wants this program can call us at 625-0446. 625-0446 will give you this program plus others that went before. And may God bless you until we meet again in Jesus' holy name.